The year is 1945. The Italian campaign, often called the Forgotten Front, is a brutal killing field, sliced in half by entrenched German forces who cling desperately to the rugged terrain of the Apennines. Now, imagine this, 400 kilometers of Axis-controlled territory. SS patrols, fascist militias, and checkpoints on every single road. And your only lifeline? A rusty, old bicycle. This is the story of Lieutenant Danilo Marques Moura, a Brazilian fighter pilot whose incredible escape from behind enemy lines stands as one of the most audacious, and perhaps most improbable, sagas of World War II. For 24 relentless days, Danilo did the impossible. He didn't crawl in the darkness, he pedaled on the main highways, hiding in plain sight, becoming a ghost moving through the very heart of the Nazi war machine. This is the true, great escape you've never heard, the tale of the pilot who fooled the Third Reich with nothing but sheer audacity, quick wits, and two wheels. On February 4, 1945, over the frigid skies of northern Italy, the air war had become an arena of all-out risk. The pilots of the Brazilian 1st Fighter Group, the Jambock Squadron, were fighting under the banner of the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, FEB, known by the local saying, "A cobra vai fumar, the snake will smoke." Their missions were essential to crippling the German supply lines along the formidable Gothic Line. Their aircraft, the powerful P-47 Thunderbolts, were robust, but even the heavy armor of the Flying Jug was vulnerable to a direct hit from German flak. Lieutenant Danilo Marques Moura, 28, the younger brother of the squadron commander, carried the extra weight of duty on this, his 17th combat mission. His target was a vital railway near Treviso, a critical artery feeding the German war machine. As Danilo dove toward the railway, the German defense was overwhelming. A lethal screen of flak, anti-aircraft fire, turned the sky into a hellish three-dimensional minefield of incandescent shrapnel and smoke. The P-47 took a catastrophic hit. The sound of ripping metal was deafening, the cockpit filled instantly with fire and dense, black smoke, choking the pilot. His fighter was crippled, screaming toward the earth in a rapid, uncontrolled death spiral. With his heart pounding, Danilo wrestled his way out of the cockpit, managing to jettison the canopy and throw himself out into the freezing slipstream. The sudden, violent tug of the parachute opening was the thin thread of his life. Suspended between the sky and the German-held Italian earth, Danilo traded the role of combat pilot for the most dangerous role of all, the hunted man. The landing was brutal and unforgiving. The impact left him severely jarred. He bit his tongue so badly he was unable to speak clearly, a catastrophic injury for a man needing to blend in. He quickly shed the parachute and ran, aware that the Germans would immediately trace the wreckage. The hunt had begun, with patrols and local fascist militias scouring the crash site. His salvation came through the Italian resistance, the Partisans. These brave civilians operated under constant threat of torture and mass execution for aiding the Allies. They took him to a safe, temporary location, treating his injuries and explaining the established protocol: remain immobile. Wait for the escape line to move. The organized escape network was slow, meticulous, and agonizingly deliberate. It could take weeks, maybe months, to move him through the complex enemy checkpoints. But Danilo Marques Moura, a fighter pilot whose nature was to confront problems head-on, refused to accept the passive fate of a prisoner awaiting rescue. He was consumed by youthful impatience and the aggressive mindset forged in air combat. To the astonished partisans, he made a staggering declaration: he would go home alone. And he would start right now. His choice violated every rule of evasion and escape training, a move that bordered on reckless military suicide. Recognizing the steel in his determination, however, the partisans reluctantly aided him. They exchanged his uniform for tattered civilian clothes, gave him a small, crude map of the region, and supplied the most important, and most improbable, tool for his escape, an old, rusty bicycle. Danilo's war became a private, grinding odyssey against the odds. He rejected the forests and the shadows. His strategy was audacious genius, to hide in plain sight. He adopted the weary persona of a simple Italian farm worker, cycling openly on the main highways, banking on the enemy's prejudice that anyone moving with such obvious normalcy could not possibly be a threat. His 386-kilometer journey was a constant psychological battlefield. Every passing Wehrmacht vehicle, every sighting of the German Black Cross, was a moment of sheer terror. He developed a hunter's sixth sense, quickly dismounting to tend to a fake flat tire or entering a field whenever danger approached. He kept his head down, simulating the aching posture of a man exhausted by the war. His injury, the slurred speech from his bitten tongue, became an unexpected shield. It perfectly masked his foreign identity, making him sound like a local peasant with a rough dialect. The danger was dual: German patrols and the unpredictable cruelty of the Italian fascist blackshirts. A simple, prolonged conversation or a lapse in his accent could lead to discovery and immediate execution. The physical toll was relentless. It was the bitter cold of a northern Italian February. Cycling for hours on an ill-maintained bike, fueled by minimal food and water, led to crushing, bone-deep fatigue. The nights were spent freezing in abandoned barns, haystacks, or under bridges, the chill of the war seeping into his very bones. He fought a constant battle against hunger, exposure, and the crushing urge to simply surrender. But amidst the brutality, he found the unexpected light of humanity. Italian civilians, though themselves living under Nazi occupation, performed silent acts of resistance: an elderly woman leaving a chunk of bread and cheese near a pump, a farmer risking his life to point out a less patrolled trail. These simple, selfless acts of courage, performed without expectation of reward, became the moral lifeline of his journey. The solitary journey had an absolute geographical barrier: the Po River. It was a wide, muddy, and powerful artery, serving as a critical defensive line for the Germans. All official crossings were mined, heavily guarded, and under constant surveillance. Crossing the Po meant survival; failing meant immediate capture or being swept away by the treacherous current. Danilo was forced to pause his lone quest to coordinate with a specialized resistance cell that handled river crossings. He waited 2 agonizing days in a remote fisherman's hut, every moment feeling exposed. The plan was meticulously set: a nocturnal crossing in a small, flat-bottomed rowing boat. On the night of the crossing, the river was an abyss of cold, dark water, echoing only the sounds of the night. Danilo and 2 partisans, their faces smeared with soot for camouflage, lowered the boat into the current. The oars were meticulously wrapped in cloth to ensure absolute silence. Midway across, the water was fast and powerful, threatening to capsize the tiny vessel. They paddled with desperate, silent strength. Then, in a moment of sheer, heart-stopping terror, the distinct sound of a distant German patrol boat engine echoed over the water. They froze instantly. They stopped rowing, allowing the current to pull the boat into the deeper shadows of the bank. The motor's sound grew louder, more menacing, dominating the silence. A powerful searchlight cut through the darkness, sweeping the river surface, moving inexorably toward their position. Danilo held his breath, every muscle tense, until his lungs burned. The blinding beam passed terrifyingly close, illuminating the bank right next to them in a terrifying flash, then moved on and faded. They had survived the ordeal by the narrowest, most brutal of margins. Reaching the south bank, they plunged back into the darkness. The final push began through the heavily militarized rear of the Gothic line. In a true test of his hide-in-plain-sight strategy, he and his guide were walking on a narrow mountain road when a Kübelwagen suddenly pulled over beside them. Two German officers observed him with cold, professional scrutiny. Danilo kept his gaze low, adopting his peasant persona entirely, waiting for the inescapable shout of detection. Instead, an officer leaned out, asking in broken Italian for directions to a nearby command post. The partisan guide, with supernatural calm, provided the details, smiling politely as if it were a casual roadside chat. Danilo had stared death in the face, and the enemy saw nothing but an anonymous, tired farmer. It was the definitive, terrifying proof that his audacious gamble had worked. Days turned into weeks. Danilo's relentless willpower, fueled only by the desire for home, was the only thing keeping him moving. He could hear the sound of the Allied artillery now, a constant, comforting thunder that promised safety. Finally, after 24 days defying death, his guide led him to the summit of a hill. Below, he saw the small Allied forward post, proudly marked by the British Union Jack. The impossible journey was over. He was emaciated, his body skeletal and covered in scrapes. He had lost over 40 pounds, more than 20% of his body mass, but his spirit remained indomitable. The British soldiers were entirely incredulous when the man in peasant rags began speaking fluent, measured English. They offered him the first real hot meal in weeks, a moment of pure confirmation, a hot stew and fresh bread that warmed not only his stomach but his soul. During the debriefing, the veteran British intelligence officer was left in stunned disbelief. The story of the 400-kilometer bicycle crossing, done in broad daylight, was so outlandish, so contrary to every principle of military evasion, that it should have been dismissed as fantasy. Yet, the precise, high-value intelligence he offered on German troop movements, routes, and resistance cell structures was irrefutable proof. The story was completely true. News of his incredible survival spread quickly. He was transported back to his first fighter group base in Pisa. His comrades, who had declared him missing in action, rushed to greet him with hugs and cheers. He was, literally, a ghost who had returned to life. However, his extraordinary courage created a critical dilemma for operational security. While his bravery was commended, he received a non-negotiable directive: Lieutenant Moura was strictly forbidden from flying new missions. The reason was clear: if he were ever captured again, the Germans would automatically categorize him as a highly trained, professional spy for escaping once. The sentence would be immediate execution, not prisoner of war status. His exceptional courage had saved him from the first capture, but, ironically, had permanently grounded him for the remainder of the war. He spent the rest of his time training new pilots on evasion techniques, turning his personal saga into institutional knowledge. The war in Italy concluded just weeks after Danilo's return. His escape immediately became one of the most celebrated personal sagas of the Brazilian war effort. It stood out not just for the feat itself, but for the sheer resilience and audacious tactical intelligence required. His survival was a moving testament to the unlikely human alliance forged in the chaos of war. He was saved by the selfless courage of dozens of anonymous Italian civilians, the partisans, the farmers, the true silent heroes of his journey. Lieutenant Danilo Marques Moura's 386-kilometer escape is a powerful affirmation of the indomitable human spirit. He refused to accept a fate imposed by circumstance. He was hunted, but never captured. By refusing to be a passive prisoner, he became a living legend among his peers. His feat inspired the creation of the famous Danilo's Opera, a comical and respectful musical parody performed by Brazilian fighter pilots at their annual gatherings, which immortalizes the humor and heroism of his journey. His triumphant return day, April 22, was officially designated as Fighter Aviation Day in Brazil, a rare, profound honor associated with the singular feat of one man. His story is a definitive lesson that tactical intelligence and sheer nerve can be more powerful than brute force, and that a determined man, with an old bicycle and exceptional audacity, can achieve feats that entire armies would deem impossible.